now before us. When these things are once completed, I shall think that I have answered the end of my creation." Unquote. Each man knew the dangers he faced. Already, two revolutionary leaders, John Hancock and Samuel Adams, faced the scaffold if caught by the British. All knew that if their mission failed, they too would be hanged for treason. As John Adams noted in a letter to Abigail, quote, "The declaration was, in fact, an act of treason, and if it were not made good, those who had signed it stood a good chance to incur the penalty meted out to traitors." Unquote. But the signers of the Declaration of Independence were not rabble-rousers. They were responsible leaders from the 13 colonies, men of vision, men of high standing in their communities. 25 were lawyers or jurists, 11 were merchants, 9 were farmers or large plantation owners, and there were also doctors and educators. A war was already in progress as they gathered in the Pennsylvania State House in a sweltering room with doors and windows tightly shut and pledged their lives, their fortunes, and risked conviction for treason in order to gain liberty for themselves and posterity. They formed a committee on June 11th to draw up a declaration. The members of this committee were John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Jefferson, whose writing skills were acknowledged by the other committee members, was chosen to draft the declaration. Looking back on the event in 1825, Jefferson recalled that their purpose had been to provide, quote, "an appeal to the tribunal of the world," unquote. This, he said, was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments, not merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject, in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we are compelled to take. In other words, he explained, it was intended to be an expression of the American mind. All its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day, expressed in conversation, in letters, printed essays, and in the books of public right, such as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney, and company, etc. Now, on July 3rd, the Declaration was almost ready. Jefferson had completed a second draft, and only a few minor alterations were needed. Decision on the final wording was near. One delegate, Caesar Rodney, who had gone back to Delaware on an important errand, was summoned for the vote. Suffering from an advanced case of facial cancer, he nevertheless rode horseback all night in the rain, arriving late in the morning for the crucial decision. There was heated debate, because not everyone was convinced that the time had come for a formal severance of all ties with the mother country. John Dickinson spoke eloquently and persuasively of the need for restraint, warning of the calamities that might follow should they fail. The delegates were wavering, when Edward Rutledge prevailed upon John Adams to speak out in support of independence. Adams rose to the occasion, making an impassioned appeal to reason that restored the resolve of the representatives to risk all they possessed in support of independence. Making no false claims, Adams spoke with candor and told the members, quote, "If you imagine that I expect this declaration will ward off calamities, you are mistaken. A bloody conflict we are destined to endure," unquote. The mission was accomplished, and what was to become the greatest nation in the history of the world came into being. The spirit of liberty, which had taken root on American soil more than 150 years earlier and had flourished in the American mind, had now expressed itself to the world in writing. Adopted on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence became the fundamental statement of the basic principles and timeless truths upon which the nation was to be established. 11 years later, the framers of the Constitution of the United States of America would, by that document, establish a new government upon the principles set forth in the Declaration. By doing so, they would translate the philosophy of the Declaration into a constitutional structuring of a government of limited powers. based upon the consent of the governed, designed to secure the individual's creator-endowed rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When the Declaration was signed, William Ellery of Rhode Island stood where he could watch each man affix his signature. Quote, "I was determined," he wrote, "to see how they all looked as they signed what might be their death warrant. I eyed each closely. Undaunted resolution was displayed on every countenance." Unquote. Such was the strength and courage of our founding fathers. Up until the time that this document was written and adopted, there had never been a people in the entire history of the world who had been truly free. You see, because all rulers, up until that time, all governments were based upon the divine right to rule, and the fact that the king or the queen or the emperor or the sultan or the emir or whoever it happened to be sitting on the throne owned the subjects being the people. And the ruler had the right to do with those subjects whatever he or she wished to do with those subjects. Even in the Roman Empire, under the Senate of Rome, the subjects were never truly free, not even in the beginning, before they began to crown their Caesars and began to become an empire ruled by emperors. Even in the beginning, the people were not free. Ever. In the history of the world, there have been slaves. In the history of the world, people were subject to the whims and desires of whoever ruled them, whoever sat on the throne or headed the government to which they belonged. Only when the Declaration of Independence was written, signed, and adopted, and then later, after a futile, vain attempt at bringing the country together with the Articles of Confederation, only when the Constitution was finally written, adopted, and became the country, the nation, and then when the first 10 amendments were written and adopted as the Bill of Rights, only then had any man or woman in the history of the world ever been truly free. And we are to this day still the only people in the history of the world, even unto this day, who are truly free and who are protected by the document known as the Constitution and the amendments thereto against any oppression by our own government or any other. Our rights, our creator-endowed rights, are protected by that document. They limit the government's power to oppress the people or to take away our creator-endowed rights. And that is the unique idea that changed the history of the entire world and made this the greatest nation ever to appear upon the face of the earth. And we're going to talk about that unique idea right now. Some of you will be angered by this, for you have given up the concept of a creator. You have said that God is dead. You have said that we don't need God and that God interferes with your life. And what you're going to hear here is just the opposite. What you're going to hear here, folks, is that without God, you are nothing. Without God, you have no protection, and you are no better than the cockroach who scurries beneath your sink when you turn on the lights at midnight. For without a creator, man is nothing, nothing. Man is on the same footing and the same basis as any other animal, any insect, any fish, or any plant on this earth, and is subject to the laws of the jungle. And anyone who is strong enough or cunning enough to enslave man is entitled to do so under those circumstances. So whether you believe in God or not, you had better listen very carefully to this program.